you guys were over here working in the 2022 election, I was over in South Dakota upsetting the apple cart. I brought my Minnesota experience into South Dakota because I was trying to figure out a way, if I can't fix Minnesota, how can I create change outside of Minnesota to force a change? So meanwhile, while you guys were struggling over here and trying to fix the state during the 2022 election, I was considering to run for Secretary of State of South Dakota. So was Jessica Palmea, my partner over at South Dakota Cannon Scene, and we had investigated election issues in South Dakota. South Dakota is unique. Minnesota has 108 ways that they cheat. South Dakota has 114 ways that they cheat. South Dakota has something unique, such as mail forwarding companies, where you can basically, at the time, register to vote at a post office, a mail forwarding company, just stay one night at a hotel or a campground, bring that receipt, and that was enough to cross nexus to become a resident of the state of South Dakota. At one address, there were 14,000 registered voters. In a town in Emory, South Dakota, the town population is 465 people, but yet at one house, 1,465 people are registered to vote there. Don't worry, it's a county commissioner that owns that property. He's always won. So then we found Monae Johnson, who was willing to run against Steve Barnett, because I was over there at the same time over here in Minnesota asking for the Castle records. He steps up and says, the Castle records don't exist, they're not a thing. And I'm like, really? 2019, in your own meeting minutes published on your own website, you're directly quoted as saying, we want to use the Castle records as part of a process to look at post-election reviews. In 2019, they were actually looking at post-election reviews to start that in the 2020 election in South Dakota. Then COVID hit, and that got cast by the side. I then did a scan in Minnesota and in South Dakota and in Arizona and in Colorado of their voter registration rolls. I found out that they were unsecure. I found out that I could inject data, download data, manipulate data into their systems without their knowledge. I presented the information to South Dakota, to Steve Barnett, a Republican. He's supposed to be on my side, right? He refused to hear it. I then met him at a Lincoln Reagan dinner event in my home county in Brookings and said, I'd like to sit down with you. He refused to follow up with me. I then took a team down to his office, presented the information again. He refused to meet with us. That very day, we went to the Attorney General's office, presented the information to him. 2 weeks later, he was impeached. You were misinterpreting. The Attorney General was impeached, not the Secretary of State. Close. So I had to work really hard. I was hoping that would happen, but that's not what happened. So the Attorney General was impeached. Then, to top it all off, June happens in 2022. State convention is coming up. We approached Monae Johnson 2 weeks before the convention, and we asked her 10 questions. We found out that her campaign was a complete fraud. She didn't have a campaign speech written. She didn't have room reservations. She had no t-shirts. She had no signs, no buttons, nothing. She wasn't even told the rules of the convention, such as you probably should have a parliamentarian help you, make sure that you are well represented on the floor, make sure that you have a person who is a delegate nominate you, and then a legislator second you, as an example. There's these weird little rules. Then, we show her the evidence of what we had found in South Dakota. At this time, we had signed affidavits from these mail forwarding companies, people who were registered there. We contacted them, and they told us they didn't vote in the 2020 election. We had signed affidavits. We brought it to sheriffs. We brought it to DCI, which is kind of South Dakota's statewide investigation service. They looked at it, held on to it for 3 weeks, and then kicked it back to us. My wife and I step up to become the campaign managers for Monae Johnson, and we pulled the outset special in South Dakota. First time in U.S. history in over 40 years, an incumbent loses at convention. 61 to 39%. We thought we were going to have a ticket going inward. We help her through the election. We keep her within 5,000 votes of Christy No, and we made sure she beat every single legislator. So that way she could go to the legislators and start potentially working on bills. I'm working behind the scenes. My wife officially becomes a campaign manager. I work behind the scenes listening into all of the lawsuits against South Dakota. And some of that's going to come over here and change election laws here. Such as the Rosebud trial now requires on voter registration forms, you don't actually have to put an address there. Do you think that'll open up the door to election fraud? Especially what's happening at the southern border? So now, South Dakota registration forms, you're not required to put an address in. I've asked her to fight that. Don't uphold it. The other piece of that settlement is the families of that settlement in perpetuity have the oversight to review the election registration forms for the rest of South Dakota's existence and have veto power over it. I can't believe we ever settled that. Then, she gets elected November 23rd. She sends a note to Gretchen and I and says, I'm cutting ties with you, and at the same time she puts out a press release that Tom Diedrich is her deputy. Tom Diedrich worked for the AG's office. He also worked for the Secretary of State's office before, and we believe that there may be some signs of corruption because he was there when VPRO was instituted. So VPRO was the competitive company to ERIC. VPRO was actually, the software code was written in South Dakota. And then Jason Gant, that Secretary of State, goes down to New Mexico, gives them the software for free, and then has VPRO do the management contract. Fast forward to earlier this year, this is how now Minnesota and South Dakota are connected. Knowing just bought VPRO. Now Knowing has access to ERIC and VPRO. VPRO's in 34 other states. And back in Minnesota,